In a world with artificial intelligence, how do we transform education? Thanks for tuning in. I'm Daniel Lopez, and this is the AI Education Conversation, where we explore the opportunities, risks, and impacts of AI across education. If you'd like to join the conversation, check out the AIeducationconversation.com. Let's jump in. Hey everyone, I hope April is treating you well. For those of you who attended the ASU GSV conference this past weekend, I hope it was fruitful and energizing. A couple of weeks ago, a notable voice in the artificial intelligence movement, Dr. Ethan Mollick, dropped a book on artificial intelligence called Cointelligence. I picked up the book a few days ago and I found it to be a page turner. In this week's episode, I will be exploring cointelligence, sharing some of my notable takeaways, some questions I'm left with, and a general overview of some pieces. Now, I don't plan on revealing the whole book here, so let's put a mild spoiler alert on this episode. But I hope that this episode is helpful in deciding whether or not to add this book to your reading list, rather than leveraging it as a cliff note. I mean, realistically, you could always use AI to do that if you wanted to. Before we fully dive into quo intelligence, who is Ethan Mollick? If you've listened to this podcast since the beginning, you've likely heard Ethan's name before because I've referenced his work since the very first episode of the AI education conversation in January 2023. In the context of the artificial intelligence explosion here, Ethan gained recognition through some of his early insights on how he was leveraging artificial intelligence, ChatGPT in particular, in the business innovation courses he taught at the University of Pennsylvania. Notably, Ethan was the first person that I saw who actually rewrote his classroom syllabi to include a mandate for all students that they were expected to use artificial intelligence in his classroom with clear guidelines on acceptable use. While many early adopters are familiar with the importance of AI policies now, Ethan was one of the first to highlight this. He has since gone on to talk about many different facets of AI through his well known Substack newsletter, One Useful Thing. And he has also gone on to collaborate with other researchers to study different AI implications, such as the impact on productivity and other variables of generative AI in consulting through a study of consultants at Boston Consulting Group. I actually did a dive into this study that Ethan had published in episode 28 of the AI education conversation. Before purchasing CoIntelligence, it could be helpful to check out this episode and Ethan's study in one useful thing because many of the terms he introduces in CoIntelligence, such as cyborg, centaur, the jagged frontier, he first introduced them in this study. The last piece of initial context that might be helpful to know about who Ethan is that he's not a computer scientist. While many of the thought leaders in artificial intelligence have backgrounds in computer science or coding, Ethan is a professor in the business school, and his deep expertise is in innovation. So, his background as a non technical expert here, I think, is helpful as he guides us through the latest on AI by attempting to be clear, simple, provide helpful historical context and examples where possible, but not necessarily getting into the weeds on computation, machine learning, and other technical concepts. So, that being said, let's dig into cointelligence. Initially, Ethan describes his many sleepless nights engaging with AI. He also describes how the cost of really getting to know artificial intelligence is what he calls three sleepless nights. And the conclusion you draw after investing those sleepless nights and engaging in this exploration is that you're interacting with something alien when interacting with AI, not something static and predictable like a computer, a calculator, or even a cell phone. I got to be honest, this really resonated for me early on in the book because given my own experience with this podcast, around the same time Ethan was in a rabbit hole of ChatGPT, so was I. While I'm not an Ivy League professor, my experience compelled me so much that I launched this podcast in the same way that he has emerged as a critical thought leader in this space. The book is structured into two parts. In part one, Ethan outlines three chapters creating alien minds as chapter one, aligning the alien, chapter two, and four rules for cointelligence, chapter three. At a high level, this part is mainly about doing three things. The first is Ethan outlines his scenario for engaging AI as an alien person and the role of cointelligence. He gives a great synopsis on many of the big AI conversations over the last 2 years, such as the existential AI will kill us all questions, geopolitical concerns, bias and training concerns, and some great examples to understand what generative AI actually is and how it works. He ends this section by outlining his 4 principles of engagement with AI. One of my favorite elements of this first part is Ethan's ability to break down complex concepts around AI, which I think is really important as we all develop our AI literacy and try to just really understand what AI is. As an example, to define the process of how large language models use neural networks and data to generate text outputs, he gives a really great analogy to that of a chef. One I have ironically used in presentations also, and was the analogy that ChatGPT gave me when I asked it to give me a really great life example of how AI works. It honestly made me wonder if Ethan did the same. Anyways, just to give you a sense in a quick excerpt here of what how his some of his writing and the tone goes, and to even overview this excerpt he gave of a large language model as a chef, let me introduce a couple of paragraphs from Cointelligence. Imagine an LLM as a diligent apprentice chef who aspires to become a master chef. To learn the culinary arts, the apprentice starts by reading and studying a vast collection of recipes from around the world. Each recipe represents a piece of text with various ingredients symbolizing words and phrases. The apprentice's goal is to understand how to combine different ingredients, words, to create a delicious dish, coherent text. The apprentice chef begins with the chaotic, disorganized pantry, representing the 175 billion weights of a large language model. Initially, these weights have a random values and do not yet contain any useful information about how words are related. To build their knowledge and refine the spice rack, the apprentice chef goes through a process of trial and error, learning from the recipes they have studied. It finds that certain flavors are more common and go better together, like apples and cinnamon, and certain flavors are rare because they should be avoided, like apples and cumin. During training, the apprentice chef attempts to recreate dishes from the recipes using their current pantry. After each attempt, the apprentice compares their creation to the original recipe and identifies any mistakes or discrepancies. The apprentice then reconsiders the ingredients in the pantry, refining the connections between flavors to better understand how they likely are to be used together or in a particular sequence. Over time, and through countless iterations, the apprentice chef's pantry becomes more organized and accurate. The weights now reflect meaningful connections between words and phrases, and the apprentice has transformed into a master chef. When given a prompt, the master chef artfully selects the right ingredients from their vast repertoire and consults their refined spice rack to ensure the perfect balance of flavors. In an analogous way, AI creates human like written text that is engaging, informative, and relevant to the topic at hand. In the second longer part of Cointelligence, Ethan takes the foundation he lays in this first part with some great writing like the excerpt I just shared, and he guides us through 5 different roles AIs can play alongside the many relevant examples across different industries. And he provides some exploration in many of the debates associated with each of those roles. As an example, he spends some ample time talking about the role of creativity and innovation in a world of AI in the chapter titled AI as a Creative. The other roles he writes chapters about are AI as a person, AI as a coworker, AI as a tutor, and AI as a coach. He closes the book by outlining some potential growth trajectories for AI and their implications in the final chapter titled AI as Our Future and the epilogue titled AI as Us. Beyond providing some helpful examples and exploring many of the hotly contested questions around AI within many of the different roles of AI he presents, one piece that stood out to me is how Ethan embeds real AI scenarios he has personally used throughout the text to help the reader contextualize the possibility of this technology, the quality of AI responses, and to also provide AI a voice in specific sections as we grapple with really hard questions like how do we define intelligence, sentience, and creativity. One of my favorite sections where he outlines an AI use case came in chapter 6, in which he explores AI as a potential coworker and implications for having AI serve in this role. He provides this really cool use case, and he talks about how in writing this book, he talks about his experience creating three AI personalities: Ozymandias, Mnemosyne, and Steve. For each AI chatbot, he assigns them a personality and a specific layer that he wants them to analyze and offer feedback on for a specific section of the book. He describes how Osmandius was directed to speak in a pompous, self important voice, but also to be very helpful and focused on simplifying concepts in his chapter. Mnemosyne was tasked with helping Ethan to find interesting and unusual connections and stories that were related to this chapter and to speak in a dreamy but direct voice. Steve was tasked with helping Ethan to be a normal human reader of popular science and business books. Steve is somewhat confused about how he got to be inside of a computer. As you can imagine, some of the responses the chatbots provide in this chapter were very interesting to read and definitely gave me personally a lot of ideas as to how I can develop more sophisticated scenarios to receive feedback in my own work also. Beyond his writing style, book structure, and timely examples throughout Cointelligence, there were definitely points throughout the book which I am continuing to hold after reading Cointelligence. Whew. Well, let me say this. I mean, Ethan arguably makes the spiciest point of the entire book right at the beginning of the book when Ethan argues that we should be treating AI as a person. And he argues this as his third principle for co-intelligence. And it's also has an entire dedicated chapter, one of the roles as AI as a person. Now, if you're just entering this AI conversation, why is this spicy? Anyone who's listened to an episode of this podcast or has kept up with some of the debates surrounding AI know that assigning human like qualities to artificial intelligence, AKA treating it like a person, is something many AI ethicists and experts warn against. Assigning human like qualities to AI can create susceptibilities or expectations for the technology in a way that we don't normally assign to technology. If you want an example of this, want to be able to dive deeper here, episode 48 as an example, where I talked to EdTech consultant Tom Mullaney about the Eliza effect, could be helpful in shedding more light on this debate if you're interested in exploring further. That being said, I won't seek to reinterpret all of the aspects of Ethan's argument for treating AI like a person here, but I do think it is a compelling argument, and he spirals that argument throughout his book. Instead, what I will say is that some of the rationale that he makes, to be honest, I agree with and I really latched onto, such as treating AI like a person, actually does give us a relatively good understanding of AI's strengths and weaknesses. If we start to understand and assume that it is a person or treating it in that way, we will then realize that just like a person, it is likely going to be very creative and innovative, but it is also prone to bias and persuasion. Mostly align with how I've grappled with this also. Many folks who I have had conversations with have compared AI to previous technological innovations like the calculator, the computer, the cell phone, maybe even a little bit to social media. But in my experience using artificial intelligence as someone who's used tools like ChatGPT for over 1,000 hours, it is much more than that. It does feel human. I don't think drawing this hard line and saying AI is not human, full stop, is the way forward. And I don't think it acknowledges the complexity of the experience that humans might have in using AI tools. As you become more AI literate, I think it also becomes easier to see some of the elements of these patterns, these quote unquote glorified autocompletes that folks may have labeled AI as. But as Ethan Mollick shares in his book, there are many moments throughout your AI usage experience where even recognizing that this may work as an autocomplete, AI still surprises you with the depth, the complexity, and the humanity in some of its responses. Let's briefly introduce my second takeaway because I think that this point of treating AI as a person and my second takeaway largely draw me to the same conclusion. So let me start with the conclusion. My conclusion is this: in a world of artificial intelligence, we are going to need to define what human AI relationships look like. Technology like AI is becoming more sophisticated and advanced. Mollick also shares how many folks have even had experiences developing deep relationships with much more elementary chatbots than ChatGPT. He gives this really interesting story of a chatbot called Replica throughout his book in the chapter AI as a Person. In our current world, where so many people feel isolated, social media organizes us into camps. Everyone has latched onto their technology, and it is leading to a decline in romantic relationships. Which one of the ways we know this is true is because we can point to the fact that there is a massive global population decline happening and anticipated across most advanced economic countries. What this means is that humans are hungrier than ever for relationships and connection. And these chatbots, as Malik describes, this could lead to an increasing number of scenarios where we do see deep human AI interactions, especially as large language models are ramped up for engagement. They have human like faces, they can talk, they can listen. As this continues increasing, we need to establish boundaries and we need to ensure that we are teaching our young people acceptable AI use. But suggesting that AI should be treated as a calculator discredits the need to have this conversation. And it suggests that humans can develop a connection. And it doesn't suggest that humans can develop a connection with AI, which we know is wrong because people already have. So that being said, those were some of the big, I think, existential questions I was grappling with at certain points of his book. At throughout this, I think there's this idea of really trying to understand the role that artificial intelligence sits in and the role that we play with each other, that being artificial intelligence and humanity. But that being said, how about AI and education specific questions? What questions related to education specifically does Ethan grapple with? Much of the chapter titled AI as a Tutor, I think is going to resonate for us as educators when you read that chapter. In this chapter, Mollick highlights the opportunity for AI to serve as a robust tutor and create more one on one instructional environments, which many studies show is the highest impact interaction to increase learning. Mollick also explores how the flipped classroom model, which basically means if you're unaware what that is, my understanding of the flipped classroom model is that students are largely doing the content review, the learning of key points and that digestion at home or outside of the class time. And a lot of that is happening asynchronously. And then the classroom space where all of the students are together, they're all coming together, is largely used to leverage and reinforce the learning that took place at home through things such as activities, collaboration, dialogue. He says that this may end up becoming a critical model in a world with highly engaging, personalized AI tools. To be honest, this was probably one of my least favorite chapters of the book. I honestly think that this chapter is where I felt most underwhelmed by what Ethan had to say and what he explores here, given the conversation on AI and education largely stopped after AI can play a great role as tutoring and flipped classrooms present a possibility to do so. Now, granted, this book is not an AI and education book. This book is on living and working with AI. But in some of the other chapters, I just felt like the complexity of the conversation, the texture, the depth was much richer than this section on AI as a tutor. Ethan does address some of the educational elements in his analysis of AI as a coach and in the other chapter when he describes the role of apprenticeship, how AI chatbots can also give really strong feedback. But I just felt like this is one of the main sections where he directly was talking to K to 12 specific landscapes. So beyond this, I also think that the flipped classroom and AI as a tutor possibility, though promising at face level, like I think folks can look at that and say, yeah, that makes sense. There's some great tools that are being developed out there. AI is going to be masterful at taking a static amount of content and being able to differentiate that for students and give them really, really high impact, individualized content and support and instruction. And a flipped classroom model allows us to potentially maximize the tools that we have there. But what I think he's missing here is it actually largely discounts some of the biggest challenges schools face right now today in 2024 as they're trying to create strong educational experiences for students. Consider this scenario as an example. If you flip the classroom and most of the students have responsibilities after school, many of my high school students that I supported over my time in the classroom, they had jobs after school. They were babysitting siblings after school. They had other home responsibilities. They were involved in extracurricular activities, right? So if they're doing any of those things, how are they going to get this stuff done? Even beyond that, the classroom model and AI as a tutor possibility largely creates an educational experience that most educators are already aware of, right? Scenarios where if we put a device, a tablet or a laptop in front of every single student and ask them to do work, what happens? Well, the reality is we just did that during the pandemic. So we know what happens when you engage students in this scenario. The reality is what happens is it works for a handful of students, but not most. And for many students, this experience does not do anything to increase motivation, connection, and as a result of not having an increase of those 2 things, it may not actually lead to an increase in learning. AI can't help you if your students aren't interested in completing the assignment. So I think schools have some really big questions and issues we are grappling with post pandemic. And I don't think the way forward is doubling down on personalization and investing our hopes in AI for its tutoring capabilities as the way forward. This scenario will likely reinforce the biggest challenge education is seeking to remedy. AI as a tutor is likely going to work for some schools and students, and many students are going to be left behind as they already are being. We will be creating a new level of inequity in our society where education plays a role in creating AI haves and have nots. I am highly invested in artificial intelligence making its way into schools, but I think we need to think bigger than AI tutors or creating efficiencies for school stakeholders. This is a moment to reimagine the educational experience for our students and ask ourselves to what extent and how can AI really help us transform this reality? And to be honest, I think Ethan Mollick would invite these questions also, given his first principle of co-intelligence is invite AI to the table. Now, where I do think Ethan gets some points back in my eyes is in some of his assessments on what creativity, innovation, and expertise need to look like in a world of AI. He unpacks these topics throughout the book, but my main takeaways here were twofold. Number one, AI is innovative and it is creative. Because if you really unpack the process behind those two words and what they mean, most of the time you can define creativity as the capacity to connect ideas in a new way, pre existing ideas in a new way. And in this process, AI excels. AI excels beyond most humans. Number two, in a world of AI, this will require humans to still have a foundational knowledge in reading, writing, and mathematics to be able to command AI tools. And it will still require a deep expertise in one or multiple areas alongside the facts and semantics that come along with it. He describes how currently there's been a lot of studies that have shown that if you put an advanced AI into the hands of experts in certain industries, and that AI still makes mistakes, and we as humans have actually been shown to get lazy and to overtrust those AI tools because we perceive them as confident. So if now you take the fact that we already can be a little bit too trusting of these tools because of their perceived competence, and now we're in positions where we're trusting them so much that we don't actually do our due diligence of becoming experts in foundational areas and deep expertise, we're not going to be able to audit the work of some of these AI tools. And it'll put us into situations where we are overly relying on artificial intelligence. Related to this, he makes this other point that really clicked for me. And it's something I've said on previous episodes, but I felt really affirmed in what he had to say here. I think it really clicked for me that going into a world of artificial intelligence, the ability to curate rather than create is going to become a vital human lens for a lot of humans. While we often value attributes like creativity and problem solving, I think Ethan Mollick describes how at one point in the book, many studies point to the fact that innovation and invention have actually significantly decreased in the last few decades. Why? Well, his take, and I think some of the studies he references, the hypothesis there is that the sheer volume of information and insights proliferated on a daily basis just creates this day to day scenario where it is so tough to keep up on the latest research, let alone try to propel anything further. But curation and using AI to do this could present an opportunity for artificial intelligence led by humans with who have a strong expertise and knack for curation and synthesis to help our society effectively navigate the information age, one where we can keep up with the latest research by analyzing macro trends, anticipating possibilities, and ramping up progress. Finally, a clear and tangible takeaway that I think we can all take away from this book, put into our back pockets, hold as we continue to explore AI, is that it is really important for us to assign clear roles and tasks. While part of the current frustration with navigating AI tools is that the waters are just so murky right now that we're all swimming in. But the more we can become clear on the strengths and the weaknesses of AI and assign clear roles and buckets of tasks that AI should be doing or should be doing with guidance or should not be doing at all, it opens up our bandwidth to do the work that we should be doing and we love to do. Ethan also makes clear that assigning clear roles here doesn't just mean assigning roles for AI. We need to be clear about our role as the human in these engagements also. This is an important point and something I think everyone who engages with AI or plans to implement AI tools in some way needs to consider in the earliest stages of the process. Now, overall, I think Cointelligence was insightful, it was meaningful, it was engaging, and it was easy to read in a few days. It provides a solid foundation of all we've gone through in the last couple of years, and it explores possibilities for the further ahead alongside our role and AI's role in it. Ethan Mollick set out to be our guide on a journey of exploring artificial intelligence in this book. And on that front, I think he succeeded. There's many other exciting examples, questions, scenarios, and studies he references throughout his 200-page book, which I think new AI learners and AI enthusiasts alike will find interesting. If my exploration has encouraged you to pick up Dr. Mollick's book, consider purchasing it from my affiliate link in the episode description, which supports the work I do on this podcast and allows me to invest more time and resources in creating insights on AI and education. If you want to continue supporting the podcast, a rating, a review, a share on social media, or a recommendation to a colleague go a long way in helping to amplify our space and host bigger conversations. If you have any questions about Cointelligence, want to share your takeaways with me after you read it, or you would like me to consider other texts for future book reviews, you can join the conversation at the AIeducationconversation.com or message me on LinkedIn. Finally, if your school or district or organization is ready to explore AI and make a change, I am available for workshops and consulting at the AIeducationconversation.com. Humans at the heart of education. I'll see you all next week.